Hey, how's it going there, folks? My apologies for the delay for those that will be joining. Josh here once again, talking boxing history in sub capacity. If you're up to me, we talk it every night, but maybe that happens one of these days. But glad you're here. Welcome, everyone. Let me get people set up here on Facebook in the case that someone wants to drop by. In the case. They do things a little different over there, but then again, maybe they changed some stuff. Maybe they changed Facebook somewhat. You used to have to edit the audience in order for people to see it. But hold up, yeah, that's still the case. Still the case there. But anyway, while I do that, again, welcome everyone here. As mentioned, we're talking a little bit of boxing history. Now, if you've checked it out on the channel, then you will know that a video was released here recently, yesterday, as a matter of fact, or I guess technically this morning, that pertains to none other than a boxer by the name of Young Pluto, who is out of Australia, but originally from South Africa, though there were different sources and such that were listed or listing where he was from. So there are different variations out there. But that being said, from what I gathered in what South Africa. So we're going to chat about, and of course, the video in itself, as well as his rival. Either way you slice it, none other than Young Griffo, the infamous Young Griffo, who is, of course, a former world champion from that period that some fans will know of. Griffo, yeah, he was a very interesting fighter for sure. So he had a ton of fights as well, as a matter of fact, and he proved to be a very interesting character in the sport of boxing, I will say. So that's what we'll dive into. Of course, while you're here, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave any comments, feedback, whatever it may be. More to come for sure. We'll be here for about an hour, maybe less, depending on how things go. The video itself, we'll be going through it, and I'll stop it and we'll go over some things. And I'll share my thoughts regarding such. So let's get it kicked off.
Boxing
You
has
see
always
mysterious
full of
Billy Smith here
characters
on the
from all walks of
screen,
life.
of course. I was just
Given that
showing
it's a
that there are
global
different types
sport,
of
there
boxers
will
you'll
always
know.
be
Some of you
boxers
don't
that
know
one may be
mysterious Billy
familiar
Smith.
with,
Of course,
and
everyone
those
knows
many
Muhammad
people,
Ali, I would think,
including
at
the
least the
hardcore fans,
majority.
have never
And
heard
of course,
of.
you wouldn't know that's Young
In most
Pluto, of
cases,
course, if you didn't know
boxers
Young
tend to
Pluto.
have rivals
Nelson,
during their
Gans,
careers,
two
and it's not
popular boxers
uncommon
from
that a
their
rival
period, of
wasn't
course,
necessarily the
and still
best
to this
fighter
day,
they
same with
faced,
Jake LaMotta,
or in
Ray
some
Robinson,
instances, a
Jack
rival could have
Dipsey,
been a
Willie
journeyman
Meehan.
who never quite became a
A lot of
significant
people
name in the
know
sport,
Jack
but
Dipsey.
just
Not
seemed to
many know
have a
Willie
particular
Meehan.
fighter's
So
number.
this is one of the
This is
cases with this
precisely the case in
video, of
this
course,
video in the rivalry
Young
between
Pluto
two
versus
Australian
Young
fighters,
Griffo.
Young Pluto and former World Featherweight Champion Young
Interesting, the
Griffo.
name Young was used
Before we dive
oftentimes
in,
during those
like,
periods, right? So
subscribe,
you
and
have a
comment if you're a
bunch of
fan of
young
boxing
this and
history,
that's,
as we will
and
continue to
that's kind of what
highlight the most obscure
gravitated me
boxers who
towards
made a
Young
name for
Griffo.
themselves in the most
Now,
complex eras in boxing.
Young Griffo, he's been on the channel
Young
in the
Pluto,
capacity of
born
other
William Dudley
fighters
Brown
that I've
in
covered.
Port Elizabeth, South
Nothing
Africa
truly
in
direct on him
1870,
outside of
though
maybe a
some sources
photo
do
animation
vary,
video.
is a
So
featherweight who fought from
this is the
1885 to
featherweight
1911,
division, or around the
mainly in
featherweight
Australia,
division
which
there,
has
which is
become his adopted
126
home.
today, but
Outside of
it can
his
vary at
name,
different
and
points.
even that may be a
One of the things I was
stretch,
putting out here
nothing really
is
stands
that
out.
Young Pluto,
He had
not
a record of
widely
17
known,
victories, 9
and I'll
losses.
stop it here just to touch on that record real quick. So we see 17 victories, with 17 of those, or 11 of those, coming via knockout. So that's not bad relative to the amount of victories. 9 losses, 11 draws, 8 no decisions, 2 no contests. Of course, in going through this and just looking at Pluto versus Griffo, I'm of the impression, and I haven't gone through that level of detail to dive into his record overall, but I'm of the impression that what's reported here is not everything, which is the case with a number of fighters from back during those periods. I'll say that what's reported here is probably shorting him on some fights. What that amount is, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that is the case because even in the Griffo rivalry, there were some dates that were a bit off based on Pluto's words versus what you'll see on like the box recs or boxer list or cyber boxing zone, etc. And there are some discrepancies between, of course, cyber boxing zone and the box rec. Of course, those are probably the two most popular, and they each have a different. They can have a different audience. They can have a different audience. Most people that go to box rec probably aren't going to go to cyber boxing zone. And the differences are that cyber boxing zone includes some of those fights that you don't see on box recs that are like exhibitions or stuff where there might not be as much information known on it. So there are slight differences there. Shout out to Key Osama. Hey, what's going on there, Key Osama? Appreciate you. Said, love this channel. It's owned by a black man. What got you into the history of the sweet science? Learned a lot from your channel. Hey, appreciate you there, buddy. Hey, thanks you there, Key. Man, hey, definitely appreciate the nod there, man. It's history. You know, history in general. My partner, she always tells me history is for the living. Of course, I've been a fan of history, of course, and I think eventually, just being a fan of boxing, I started to gravitate towards the history side of boxing. You know, that's like that saying, the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. It's like two in the bush there for me, or killing two birds with one stone, the history aspect and the boxing side of it. And seeing some of the old boxing footage, something about it just gravitates me towards it. And a big one, of course, was, I've shared before, is Dempsey versus Willard. Just seeing Jack Dempsey go in there and absolutely destroy such a huge guy in Jess Willard. And you can see from a technical standpoint that he had abilities comparable with those that we even see today, despite many people thinking that the sport has evolved to some major degree. But that being said, that's one of the things of that nature. Seeing guys like Jack Johnson and Joe Gans and just all of you, just looking into them, just more and more gravitated more and more towards them. So I appreciate you there, Kate. Thank you for being here in the mix. And then there's some others that make boxing history stuff on YouTube that made me a fan of it, and I would watch it. And then I was like, hey, you know what? Let me give it a shot myself. You know, I'm into creating, I'm into writing. And so I started writing, and then lo and behold, eventually videos. I used to watch this channel, The Boxing Librarian, and he had a lot of stuff on a lot of old school boxers from this era, and yeah, just some names that you generally won't see, and that made me look more and more into names that aren't the typical that you see out there. So that's one of the things that got me into it. But appreciate you, Key Osama. Hopefully we see you again in here, Key. Salute there to you, Dan the man. Appreciate you, Dan. Hey, be sure to check out Dan, folks. Dan the man, always dropping knowledge in the comments, etc. So you are appreciated there, Dan, per usual. Thank you for dropping info on the video of reference here. Excuse me, video of reference here, as that's appreciated as well. Shout out to my man, Rodolfo Rivera Jr. Appreciate you there, Rodolfo. Thank you for dropping by there, buddy. Be sure to check him out, folks. Hey, Rodolfo always in the mix, learning about the history of the sport and what's going on there. Got the greatest show of luck. I appreciate it, Dan. Flattered, honored, as a matter of fact there. Appreciate you there, buddy. Hey, I have the greatest individuals coming through to show some love here. That's what I would say. That makes it worthwhile. And, hey, keep on going with it. Just keep it on, as they say. But yeah, thank you. So right here we're looking at Pluto's record, as mentioned. Joseph William Dudley Brown, his name, and he went by Joe Pluto at some points as well, from what I saw. Now, there wasn't a ton relative to the name, I would say. Yeah, it was a lot of information, but not a ton in terms of just available stuff out there to just pull from and reference. I found some articles. I found some, articles from actual newspapers. Then their Wikipedia, they had some information. They had some articles sourced there, mainly from Trove, Chronicling America, which I use. Oftentimes, does it have? Well, it has a lot of stuff, of course, that is America-based, but oftentimes there were journalists, etc., from America that were reporting on some of these fights and things that took place outside of America, of course. But that being said, Pluto fought mainly in Australia, so in all likelihood, you probably find more information on him from Australian sources. But I was able to find some information there. One of the things with Chronicling America that sort of kind of makes it challenging, I guess you could say, is when you're going with a pseudonym or whatever you want to call it, nickname, like Young Pluto. When you're searching for that, it wants to find pretty much any instance in history based on their catalog and archive where Young and Pluto are used, I guess, in the same newspaper or whatever it may be. So you could have instances where the word young might have been used for something in an article about cooking, and then Pluto might have been used in an article about space or something like that. So that makes it challenging sometimes when you're searching for these types of things, when they use those names. And then, of course, with him using that name as opposed to his birth name, of course, that also adds another layer. But that being said, relatively speaking, there is a decent amount of information for an individual with that low amount of fights actually recorded from that period there. We're talking late 1800s, and who fought primarily out of Australia. So I will say nods in that regard. But as I mentioned, I do think that there are likely some fights that aren't captured even on the sites that capture and document boxing history or boxing records. I think there's probably some stuff that is not captured out there. Kiyosama mentions it's amazing how many of these fighters could fight in any era when you really understand the nuance. You understand that to many fighters' careers overlap. To say someone can't fight in another era, yeah, hey, no doubt about it. No doubt about it there, Key. I'm going to make a video somewhat kind of tied to that. I have to work it. I haven't started it yet. At least have kind of the thought process around it. But sometimes there's a notion that some of the moves, even I've seen a video recently where they say defense has evolved, and that fighters from back during this period didn't know any of the techniques that are used defensively here in this current modern, I guess, era. And I viewed that as being totally off base right there, because there are boxers even going back to eras in the 1800s, as mentioned, who were known for their defense, their head movement. Young Griffo is one of those individuals who, on the defensive side, was highly regarded. So that's why I do want to touch on that somewhat in some form of a video. But right here, as we have Pluto's record up, as mentioned, the majority of his fights did take place in Australia, though he did fight in other spots on occasion, and he started out in South Africa. That's where his first two recorded. But that being said, I know he mentions in an article his first fight in Australia, and that's one that we don't is not recorded as a person that is his first fight that is listed on like the boxing sites and all that stuff. So his top opponent is certainly going to be Young Griffo, and Young Griffo was a fighting machine, I guess you can say, between their first fight. I listed the record in the books there, or in the video there, so I'll let that I'm gonna let it play here.
11 draws.
I listed the record
11
between
of
this
his victories
first
came
fight
via
that
knockout.
they had.
He also had 8 no
The
decisions,
amount of fights
along
that
with 2 no
were
contests.
added to
At face value, I can certainly understand
Griffo's
someone
record
scrolling past
in
Young
that
Pluto without even
period
having a second
is insane.
thought about it.
Between just
This
shows you
is
double
a
an
sharp
amount of
contrast to
fighting
his
that he was
counterpart and main
doing,
rival,
which
Young Griffo.
is
Born
mind-boggling
Albert
in some
Griffiths
sense.
in
So
Bendigo, Victoria,
their
Australia,
first
in
fight 9-1 and
1869.
3. That's what Young Griffo
Griffo
was.
was and
And let me
is to
see
this
here
day
by
the more known
their
commodity, having captured
what
the
is
World
recorded as their
Featherweight title
4th
on
fight, and this
September
is like a
2nd,
year later,
1890,
41
by
or
defeating
48-1
Torpedo
and
Billy
23.
Murphy.
So that just gives you an
Griffo would
example.
hold on to the title for about 2 years
And
had
yeah,
shared
so
the ring
essentially,
with a number of the most
and just a fighting,
Australia
just a
counterpart
fighting
and
guy
main
there,
rival,
Griffo.
Young Griffo.
Take a look, they're running it
Born
back there.
Albert Griffiths in
But yeah,
Bendigo, Victoria,
Australia, Albert Griffiths, the name,
by
of course.
defeating Torpedo Billy Murphy.
He won the title
Griffo would
against
hold on to
Torpedo
the
Billy
title for
Murphy,
about
who was
2
known to
years
have a punch on
and
him
has
as
shared the
well.
ring with
I've
a number
considered
of the
doing a
most
video on
elite
him for a long
boxers of the
period.
era
Haven't gotten to
in
that
or
one yet,
around his
but I
weight
definitely
class.
want to do one at some
His
point
record
on
outstanding.
Torpedo Billy
He had
Murphy.
68
Let's
victories,
take a look at
11
the record here for Young Griffo. As you can see, in terms of what we can say, official record, I guess you can say, 68 victories with 33 knockouts, 11 losses, 38 draws, 81 no decisions, 31 no contests. And of course, I always hearken on and highlight the no contest because those are game changers when you're thinking about boxers just in history in general. Kiel Summer says, we know that's false because of Joe Gans and Biddy Leonard. No doubt about it there, Kiel Summer. No doubt about it. Zan mentioned defense was better. Yes, indeed, they're dead. Older you go back, better the defense. Indeed. Yes, and I think, yeah, we can highlight that in so many instances. We can show videos. We even have some videos from that period, thankfully, just dating back that would defy the logic that is kind of spread out there. Excuse me, which is pretty crazy. But hey, people have their thoughts. Anyway, so Young Griffo, he had over 200 fights, which is insane, right? 200 fights. Just imagine that today. Now, we do see some amateur boxers who get to these levels of fights in terms of total amount and quantity, which is a good thing. I think that help to boost them. And it does add to that ability in that transition to the pro ranks. So kudos and nods to the amateurs. I think that's sort of a replacement in some sense for here in this modern time. So you don't see as many with that amount as far as pro fights, but you do have them with amateur fights. Lomachenko around close to 400 amateur fights. I mean, Beck the Bully, he recently fought. Supposedly he had 200 to 300 or something amateur fights. Mirjan Akhmadaliev, another Uzbek, so many fights they're crazy. Hundreds. Adrian Broner, he had like 300 and something fights. Just go on and on. Just that amateur side definitely helps. It doesn't always guarantee you're going to be the guy in the pro ranks and the world champion, the undisputed world champion, or anything of that nature. But there's no question that if you have that amateur pedigree, that puts you somewhat a step ahead of an individual who comes without such, and I think we'll continue to see more and more of that. When you have a fighter like Kiara Brown, who recently won the world title in the featherweight division on the women's side, she had the amateur background to back this trajectory towards a title. It took her a while to get that title shot, but her background, it kind of lended to that trajectory towards the title, essentially. She had the skill set, competition, the experience nationally and in the world there. So no doubt that boosts you somewhat compared to someone who doesn't have that. So same with these fighters back in the day. When you had a ton of fighting that you were doing, that no doubt about it boosted you and what you were able to do in the ring for sure. There's no way you can tell me someone with 200 and how many ever fights doesn't know how to fight. If we look at guys who actually are just we take modern boxing here today, at least, we'll look at guys who are actually just opponents. You know, we see someone, they have like a 3-26 record or something. They're just brought in as an opponent. Those guys, even they know how to at least fight in there and work their way around in a ring in most cases. There are some outliers, of course, but generally that process of building up a fighter, it's very strategic, meticulous, you know. So oftentimes when you have those opponents, they're in there with the expectation that they're going to lose, at least from a promoter standpoint. It's just like a building process. And sometimes you'll get those upsets, those unexpected wins, or you'll have someone highly touted coming out of there and they can't get that opponent or fighter they're going against out of there, which would be, of course, major boost for you, your first fight, especially if you're getting that backing and televised content from like a major promoter or whatnot. So it certainly helps and boosts you if you go in there and get it done quick. But oftentimes that it's not guaranteed, of course. But I say that to say, of course, back then, a guy like Young Griffo, 200 plus fights. I mean, come on. Clearly, yeah, there's something about him, especially in the time frame in which I had mentioned. Shout out to Josh Taylor. Salute there to you, Josh Taylor. Appreciate you there, buddy. Matter of fact, sent you an email, Josh Taylor, as the winner of that Jack Dillon book. And I will announce it on the channel as well, matter of fact. And I'll do that shortly. But sent you that, Josh Taylor. So appreciate you there, buddy. Man, thank you for always dropping by, showing some love, all that good stuff. Appreciate everyone here in the mix, as a matter of fact. But yeah, Josh Taylor, you are that winner, so I'll definitely get that to you for sure. It's over here. I got it right here by my side. Then here's the one I was reading as well. So I'll make sure that you get that. And shout out to Mark Allen Baker, who came through here last week. Great conversation. The Who's Your Bearcat, Jack Dillon, another guy, we're talking 200 plus fights, who, man, just insane out there. But Young Griffo, you see there the record. Man, he knew what he was doing there in the ring. And supposedly he wasn't a guy who was big on training and all of that stuff, but he did what he had to do to, you know, maintain in the ring, you know, when he was actually there and he had to compete.
38 draws.
So
33 of his wins came via knockout.
So no knock there.
81 no decisions and
but
41 no contest.
As I always mentioned, the no decisions, this was during that era. No decisions, they're a big deal. So sometimes they're not counted. And when you look at these official records, like you look at Box Rec, they won't always have those
rabbit hole, but I'll stop there. All world
records counted because the no decisions,
now, what if I told you Griffo
usually resulted in prearranged draws, things of that nature.
For all intents and purposes, it was
ultimately,
each of their fights was a draw.
You have to look through how it's reported, the sourcing from that period to really get that understanding. Now, in relation to Griffo and Pluto, it was stated that all of their fights were a draw, though you can see some where it's listed as newspaper decisions in favor of Griffo. That being said,
but he was
they were all considered to have been draws. Now, they had some pretty crazy back and forth between them in terms of the overall fight. So the perspective of this video and article speaks from Young Pluto speaking on Young Griffo after Young Griffo's death.
The fight was scheduled for 10
so I think it was 1927.
That Griffo was about 16 years old, and he was a year older. Which
when they first fought, just think about that. 16 years old, Griffo, Pluto, about 17 years old when they first fought. This what I was mentioning with this record in terms of 9-3-6. So you saw for Pluto, he finished his career with probably just over 30 fights, and Griffo over 200 fights. So when they first fought, they were comparable record-wise. As a matter of fact, Griffo or Pluto might have had a few more fights than he did. So that just shows you the level of
This
and
contest would be
degree
a
of fighting
scheduled
that
fight to
was
the
taking
finish
place
and
for young
ultimately
Griffo
it
over
would
the
end in
course
a
of his
draw
career.
after 19 rounds. This is what records on a number of the boxing sites list, but Pluto himself.
So what I'm trying to show here is kind of sort of the discrepancy. So this was listed as sort of the second fight for them. And, you know, the top photo or depiction is BoxRec, and it's listed as May 25th. And it says open field, Melbourne, 19-rounder. The bottom one is, I'm showing an example of Cyber Boxing Zone, and it is May 26th. Potentially, it could have been May 26th. Victoria, Australia. Now, open field, it says Lilydale, Melbourne, and Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Yeah, what I was trying to say is Melbourne is in Victoria, Australia, but it doesn't have the exact place here. And you see draw 19, question mark, of course, in some reports saying that it's a draw in 23 rounds. Pluto himself stating it a bit differently.
The second fight.
He said they fought at the Hibernian
Hall as a
Hall
preliminary
in
on the
Melbourne.
night that Jack Burke and Peter Newton fought a championship bout. Griffo and I went 8 rounds.
And what I pointed out here is
it was declared a draw.
That despite what's on BoxRec, what's on Cyber Boxing Zone, Burke and Newton, they did fight 5 times.
The first fight was at
neither of them were on the date of May 25th or 26th. And they fought at the Hibernian Hall on May 7th.
So maybe
and this is when
some dates are slightly off. I mean,
Pluto said he fought Griffo for the second time there. So that goes to show you sometimes the reporting and when it actually happened,
another fight that
it can be off. That's a challenge because it's a long time ago. But we've done a great job collectively over the course of history to track down and get a lot of this stuff aligned. So don't get me wrong, it's amazing we have what we have. And this particular fight that is discussed here, which is one that happened in some fruit field in the morning, the middle of the morning. This is one that I didn't see any direct accounts of as far as reported on this record. So there's likely one that wasn't recorded. There were often some fights that took place in secret or in locations where you had to be there to kind of just know what was going on, when, how, when, and where, essentially. Dan mentions Torpedo Billy Murphy, one of the greatest of all time. Huge stunt in New Zealand with Fitzsimmons and Jim Mates. Oh, yes, indeed. Indeed, a New Zealander right there. Torpedo Billy Murphy is no doubt a big puncher for sure. And of course, as mentioned, that's where Griffo actually, or who Griffo won the title from, the World Featherweight title.
I don't like to say it myself, but
so
I knocked Griffo
yeah, I want to get a video on him at some point. For sure.
Griffo was a hard man to knock out.
So in this contest,
he was trying to turn it up.
Pluto notes that he knocked down Griffo 22 times.
Who had 10 pounds
22
on
times. 22 times.
He was beaten and called out, "The police are coming." We scattered in all directions, but it was a false alarm.
And what he's highlighting here is the fact that when this fight happened,
the late Jim Donegan and Griffo and his
he actually
something was said about going on with the fight.
They actually,
I walked up and punched Griffo,
or someone that was there actually stopped the fight, or at least said the police were coming, and the police weren't actually coming. This is someone who had backed Griffo, had pounds on him. 10 pounds is what was recorded, at least. And then they scattered. So to show the craziness of it and how it just was back then, they ended up linking up at the Ringwood station. And I showed an old picture from that period, at least. And Pluto wanted to fight then and there, keep it going. So technically, the fight never ended. It really is just a matter of them scattering with that notion of the police being present or on the way or whatever it may be. So he noted that he punched Griffo while he was there. And there have been other stories of kind of skirmishes and things with Griffo that happened outside of the ring as well. but he liked to drink. Apparently, he was a big drinker, and therefore, hey, he could have been even better. Some would say if he was dedicated to training and less of a sort of a wildling in that sense on the booze. So, but true rivalry between these two
back to Melbourne
and bad blood. They did not like each other.
Their third fight would take place on June 6, 1888.
And sometimes you have that. Maybe you even need that.
At Victor's Athletic.
You don't have to like each other to respect each other, you know, in that ring, at least as far as abilities.
Well, that's
because what is noted in this video as well is how Pluto holds Griffo in high regard as the greatest fighter ever. And of course, through a second party, Pluto notes him being held in high regard by Griffo, a friend of Griffo. That's how he got word of such. And that just goes to show you, with Griffo even alluding to Pluto being the best fighter he had faced.
16 rounds in a 12-by-14 ring.
Now, of course, no disrespect, gratitude towards each other, but hey, maybe even in those moments, and given the time period when they happened,
but an order was given that
maybe he truly felt that was the case.
The door would be knocked out. At the end of 16
rounds, I thought this was a funny one. That third fight, what is listed as their third fight, and Pluto notes there were only about 26 people present, and that it was bloody and gory, and they had word that anyone in the audience, no one could leave, and if you would be knocked out if you tried to leave, because that shows you that sometimes these fights were held in secret, they were illegal, which has been the case.
And in a second, we were fighting
as we go back through some of these fights in history.
And the attendants.
And the two ended up fighting at the hospital as well.
Before they arrived, Griffo and I were separated and got away. Griffo caught the train to Sydney that night. And I went to Sydney and stayed there for a month with James Wilson and the late Donald Wallace.
And Pluto went to Geelong. That's the location there as well.
Madden fixed up everything so that I, at any rate, would not be prosecuted.
So he didn't get caught
quietly from Sydney and was playing billiards.
This being Pluto, but Griffo, he was eventually caught and arrested from what was this third fight, or at least what stemmed from that fourth fight. Now, I will note that Griffo, he also had some other run-ins over the course of his time, to include in the U.S. So these fights, and I believe all of them actually between these two took place in Australia. No, I'm positive. Yeah, that's the case. All of them were in Australia, unless there, unless there's some out there that we don't know of now, which could be very well the case. Now, Pluto did fight in America too. So for all we know, there could have been some sort of cross fighting, or they could have crossed over as far as being in some of the same fighting circles in America. That could have legitimately happened. I don't know for sure. Maybe there's some stuff out there that did happen that alludes to such. But generally, all of their fights, recorded at least, were in Australia.
With what is listed as a newspaper decision having got the better of Pluto. Now, like a couple of the other fights, according to Young Pluto himself, his fourth meeting with Griffo is actually a fight recorded as his fifth meeting.
So the fourth meeting, as it's alluding to in this portion of the video, is
this is recorded as
it could be his fifth meeting. There are kind of differing accounts there as far as what Pluto stated, what was
Derby day night in
listed on
the day that the mighty Carbine was beaten by Inside.
Now, in relation to this fourth, potentially fifth fight, whatever it may be, fourth, in the words of Pluto, I did look into this, right? So he was talking on Derby Day Night, and this is an event held in Australia, sort of like the Kentucky Derby. Australia has their own versions of derbies that take place. As a matter of fact, there are a number of them. And so I was looking through, they're like historic records on derbies and winners at these particular events. So I was looking through some of the history of this, right? And there are different derbies that took place. I was able to eventually find a Melbourne derby. Now, in the article where Pluto is speaking, he speaks of Carbine, which is this horse right here, and Ensign. Ensign was a horse. At first, I was looking at it, thought that maybe it was translated wrong as far as the article and how the journalist captured it, or what it was intended to be. But I did see evidence of a horse named Ensign that was competing during that period. Now, where the differences come, of course, is Pluto is speaking of this particular race. I couldn't find anything directly, and I didn't do like a ton of research to the extent I hadn't submitted the last year or whatever. This video is probably about a month in the making, or a little over a month and a half maybe, since I've been working on this. So I spent different instances looking at different things. But anyway, based on what I was able to research, I was able to find, of course, Carbine. I couldn't find where Ensign beat Carbine, but I did find where they were mentioned in an article. And of course, the races did happen in Carbine. It is in a Derby Hall of Fame or something to that degree that I was able to find. And they're like Wikipedia pages covering these derbies that took place. And of course, what I'll allude to in this video, and what I'll get to, is he does mention another fight that took place, and I was able to find that fight, which kind of pieced together when it actually happened versus when it was reported in that listing on the different boxing sites.
We fought a 6-round preliminary to the fight between Jack Burke and Wolf Rindolph.
So this is where I get to that. So Jack Burke and Wolf Rindolph was listed in that article as well. And what I found out was that Wolf Rindolph is actually Bindolph, and that allowed me to find out when this fight actually took place as far as Burke and Rindolph. And they did fight at the Hibernian Hall, as mentioned, which is a famous spot there that we did have pictures of. And when they fought, it was on November 3rd. Now, in looking through the Derby days and all of that stuff, I couldn't quite sync the actual Derby day or Derby day with the champion horse Carbine being defeated by Ensign, but I could link this fight. And maybe it was a race that was of some other type. These derbies, they seem to happen annually. There might be multiple instances of them. I'm sure there are people out there that are big in that sport, and of course I am not, even though here, shout out to Rosecroft Raceway. A lot of the amateur fights that we do here, they happen in Fort Washington, Maryland, at a place called Rosecroft Raceway. So there is a connection with raceways and boxing. That's pretty interesting, right? But anyway, I just wanted to throw those little tidbits out there. So
always remember that stuff. Night. Somebody threw half a crown into the ring.
Now,
from a long way.
Pluto looks being hit with half a crown. I assumed, yeah, he's talking about an actual crown. And he said it left a scar that he bears to this day. So in this interview, it was 1927. So, he was older. He died in, I believe, 1931.
Griffo then went to Sydney.
So they only got 5 pounds, he said, for that fight. But then those that were watching it started to throw coins, etc., into the ring. So that's what allowed him to amass what would amount to about 80 pounds for that contest. I didn't do the actual conversion, but I'm sure it's a pretty solid difference, or a solid amount with inflation compared to today, Shout out to Dan. Hibernian is Irish Hall. Okay, gotcha. So they represent for that there in Australia there, Dan. They do represent for that. So Australia, maybe they have some ties to, or some Irish
Here, Pluto
people, I'm sure,
went
that
on to
from a
describe
fighting
a
perspective,
situation
of course, the
involving
Irish
former
probably came
World
through.
Heavyweight
But
Champion
good stuff
James
there,
J.
Dan,
Corbett
and
and
sharing
young
that knowledge.
Griffo. A recall
James
it
J.
such.
Corbett,
Young
former
Pluto
World
stated,
Heavyweight Champion.
Griffo was an easy man to act as second
So,
to because he
as
could do
mentioned,
whatever he
Griffo,
was
he
told.
liked to drink. He was
Talk
always
the
in
life
bars.
out of you,
So
for
this is
instance.
in reference to
He'd
a
say to
skirmish
me,
between
I'm
he
going to
and
hit
James
you
J.
10 times
Corbett
in the mouth this round, Joe. And
that
sure enough,
happened.
he would smack, would come the glove, and that's two. Griffo
So here
would say,
Pluto speaks also to
bang, bang,
how
that's four, he'd
Griffo
say.
would talk
And
trash
then he'd get
during
the
the
other
bout,
half dozen
essentially
quick
kind of
revising.
telling him what he's going to do before he
Young
does
Corbett,
it.
the world's
You know?
champion, also told me
So that
he
was happening
tried
back
to hit
then.
Griffo and couldn't. Corbett was taking his wife to the theater and
So
called in at a
the
saloon
story
where
here
Griffo
is
was
that
drinking. I tried to hit
Griffo
him,
said
Corbett,
something
but couldn't land
about
a blow
Corbett's
till I
wife.
dragged him
Corbett
to the
went to
floor,
try and
and then he kicked me in
punch
the
him or
face.
whatever, caught him at a bar,
He was full of
but he
every
couldn't
crazy
land
trade, and
anything,
what
and then
Griffo
it ended
couldn't
up
do
being the
wasn't
bigger
worth
guy,
doing.
just dragging him down. But
Well, that was
Griffo
until
kicked
I
him in
had
the
to
face.
fight to a finish at the Melbourne Athletic Club.
But Corbett seemed to have
Now,
respect
this
for his
was
overall
their
skill set
sixth
as well.
meeting, or potentially their fifth or beyond, depending on the sources.
Now, as far as
But
their
either
next
way,
fight,
it would go
it went down
on
at the
December
Melbourne
12th,
Athletic Club.
1889,
And this
at
is
the
another
Melbourne Athletic
one of
Club.
those instances
This would be their most epic
that
bout,
was
as this was a
a
fight to
bloody
the finish.
war.
Varying sources have
Now,
reported as a 70-round fight as well as a 48-round.
so this is the fight where you see sort of in the title of the video that I released, 76 rounds of blood. But basically, Pluto accounts for it being 76 rounds. Now, I saw a listing of it being 70. I think BoxRec has 40 rounds. So there are different variations or amounts out there, but that 70 range seems to be sort of adequate based on what I saw, sort of just kind of researching it when I was. Now, 76 rounds, just think about that. And it's insane, just the parallel, well, not parallels necessarily, but kind of the thought behind a Marcus of Queensberry rules fight going for that long, but it actually happened. And sometimes there are inaccurate parallels between London Prize ring rules and the Marcus of Queensberry rules. So people will mix up the two. Now, of course, if it's a London Prize ring fight, which was the typical of the bare knuckle, though there you also hear the term bare knuckle rules as well. The way it operated or worked was when a fighter went down, the round would end. So therefore, you would often see these crazy round lengths or whatever, or in terms of the actual quantity of rounds, but also in the actual length of rounds. It escapes me the exact, but I believe I know it's one of John L. Sullivan's fights. I can't remember if it might have been his first fight with Paddy Ryan, or it could have been the Jake Curran fight. It escapes me exactly now, but I know there was like a round that was about 9 to 10 minutes or something like that had went down because, of course, there was bare knuckle rules. It was under London Prize fight rules, essentially. But in this case, of course, this is Marcus of Queensberry rules, what we recognize as the rules today. So there were individuals oftentimes, and this happened countless amount of times, that they were fighting under London Prize ring rules, 3-minute rounds to extreme lengths, which shows you just the level of endurance that these individuals had, the toughness, the mental capacity, just you name it. It's just absolutely insane to think that two individuals would fight for 75 rounds. And he'll note that they were fighting from 8 p.m. in the evening or night to 2 something in the morning, 2 something a.m. Dan mentions Hibernia is ancient name Romans had for Ireland, Latin. Okay, good stuff there. Look at that, Dan, always sharing some knowledge there. Big ups there to you, Dan. Appreciate that, buddy. Appreciate you sharing such. Good stuff there. So that Hibernian Hall, that seemed to be a popular one for fighting over there in Melbourne, at least in Australia.
Whatever the
so
case
good stuff,
may be,
Dan. Appreciate that.
Young Pluto himself described it as follows. It was agreed that it was to be
Now,
our
Pluto
last
also
fight.
notes that this fight, which is that 76 rounder, was their final fight, or at least it was agreed that it would be their final fight.
And years after, a friend
There is another
Griffo
fight that is
wrote
recorded
Griffo
after
told him
this
in
on
America
the
not long
boxing
ago
sites,
that it was
that
the
being like
greatest fight of his
BoxRec
career.
and even on Cyber Boxing Zone,
I fought Tommy
likely the case on Boxer
Joe
List.
Gans, George Dixon, and Jack McCall.
So here leading off, this is Pluto referencing to
Joe Pluto
a friend of Griffo's who let Pluto know that Griffo told him that he was the greatest fighter that he had faced,
as far as the fight,
and he noted that he fought Tommy Ryan, Jack McCauley, Joe Gans, George Dixon. I mean, 4 greats right there. McCauley being the first lightweight champion. McCauley and Griffo did fight though. So very interesting. Well, he fought all of them, but I'm just I'm thinking about it. But yeah, they did fight. Now Pluto, he also fought George Dixon, and he got a shot at the World Featherweight title, which is amazing.
The members were good sports, though, and didn't mind a drop of blood.
Now, what this depicts is, what I'm just speaking on, is the amount of blood that was being shed in this contest.
Were cut to pieces,
and what Pluto do notes, we're talking about these extreme lifts, right? He notes that he was numb, and pretty much all of his extremities were numb.
And when he fell, I walked to my corner and said to Newton, I've got him this time.
And I believe this round,
Professor
I was
Miller
talking about the 51st round, I think is when he said he knocked him down for the first time.
I had a minute of the round left to finish him, and although I aimed 100 blows at him, I never touched him.
After he knocked him down, he was unable to finish him.
Close, and when I'd uppercut,
or he was unable to really land. That's what he's accounting for right here.
And it wouldn't be there.
So therefore, of course, Griffo, he continued to do his thing.
And through my legs when the gong went. For 4 rounds after,
and then he speaks to Pluto. This is just the inability to really land on him. So Griffo, he was known for his defense. To get into the nuances and particulars of it, I would need to dive a bit further into him myself, which I haven't done. But the indication is they speak to his head movement, upper body movement. You think of a guy like Canelo at his best defensively, you see him doing a lot of upper body movement. Just using him as a sort of modern example. So Griffo was known for the upper body movement and being defensive in that sense. Think about Lecce. What is his name? Lecce? Nicolino.
History based on
Lecce.
Now, the final meeting,
I think he's Argentine, the Argentine fighter.
91 at Clark's Theater in Melbourne.
What is his name?
With Pluto dropping a 4-round newspaper decision at the hands of Griffo.
Oh yeah, Nicolino Loche.
Well been the case,
yeah, that's what I'm trying to think of.
Who really knew were no doubt Young Pluto and Young.
But he was, you can see, he had that crazy movement with his body, head and all of that stuff. And then a new Dan would be on it. Indeed. Nicolino Loche, just thinking of some of the descriptions of Griffo, think about Loche in terms of someone we have a visual example for just here, thinking off top. And he was able to do some pretty impressive feats on the defensive end, and you can see there. And he didn't even need to move his feet as much, to just stand there in place and just show you how it's done defensively. Something that Griffo was noted for doing.
What was recorded as a 10th round knockout.
Loca.
Phenomenal.
Okay.
Loca. Where Pluto started.
Italiano.
Some other top
good stuff there, Dan. Thanks for sharing. So what I'm noting here is the fact that Pluto, who we saw, not a huge name there, he did get a shot at the World Featherweight title against George Dixon. Now, when he was fighting Griffo didn't have the featherweight title. He did fight George Dixon, as mentioned. That's a
on
comparable
those
opponent
fights with
between the two.
Griffo,
Then I
he
mentioned
also
Tim Callahan.
noted
He fought for a
his
world
start in the
title. Might
sport,
have been a featherweight title, but
saying,
another
"I was
very,
born
very,
in
very
South
good fighter
Africa and
that
worked
is
on
not
the
really known.
tugboats
I
as
know
a
Dan.
boy.
I know you know
When
of
12
Tim
years
Callahan,
old,
but
I had my
basically
first fight with
a
another
top
colored boy
tier
named Sultan.
contender from that
After
period or
that,
that
I stowed
era
away
who
on a
could have
boat
been world
called
champion.
the E.J. Spence,
Hey, sometimes you just run
commanded
into
by
some
Captain
other guys
Hill
that are
of
just on that
Melbourne.
level. But that being said, an
He was very
example of
kind
the
to
types
me,
of
and
names
when
that
we
are
reached
not
Melbourne,
as
he
known
found me
there.
employment.
So here,
The
Pluto
first
was
fight I
speaking
had
of
in
his
Australia
journey
was
from
with
South Africa.
Inspector
That was a
West
ship
of the
that was
West
based out of
Australian Police Force,
Melbourne. Actually
who was
found a picture of
recently
it out there.
transferred from
Now,
Perth
of course, with
to
individuals like
Clontibon.
this, you don't
We
really
fought
have
a
any
6-round
video, just
draw
given the
as a
period.
preliminary
So
at
you
Seaboard
have
in
a limited
Melbourne.
amount of pictures. For
Mr.
Pluto, there
West
might have been
got
about
a little
three
gold
pictures,
medal,
3 to 4
which he wears
pictures.
to this day.
Um,
It is men like
and when I
Mr.
say three
West
to
I
four, I might be
admire
counting one of them
and
twice,
respect both
essentially.
inside
So
and outside the ring. He was a very fine
it is
gentleman.
pretty interesting.
Now,
So you
in
have to find
relation
other ways
to
to kind of
young
highlight them. And I
Griffo
don't have
in
any of the
closing,
animation,
young
sort of
Pluto
the
stated,
depicted
Griffo
animation
was
I
a
used to
master with the
share, of
gloves,
course.
and although I feel very sorry that he is dead, I never liked him.
Now that right there is a little nod. So Future, he had an album called "I Never Liked You," but the way that that ended, of course, was with Pluto stating that this he felt sorry that Griffo was dead, but letting it be known that he never liked him. So these guys, they never were like friends or anything like that. It was, I guess, more so cordial at best. And you heard some of the stories, and you will hear some of the stories in the video of them getting into it outside of the boxing ring as well, and Pluto being willing to face him outside of the boxing ring. So he would have done it bare-knuckle style as well. As a matter of fact, the second fight I think that is reported on, that's when they had skin gloves. So you would see that in instances. It's practically bare-knuckle, but you just have some skin-tight gloves that are on. And of course, speaking of the blood, that's what comes about when you do things of that nature. Most certainly when you're having bare skin tight gloves, which really isn't providing protection for anything in actuality. So Dan mentions thanks to Josh O'Callaghan. Yes, indeed. There, Dan. Yeah, appreciate you there, buddy. Cool, indeed. So, man, just a very interesting, amazing and interesting story there. This being that of young Pluto. Now, I think I may have been speaking on it slightly earlier, but the thing that gravitated me towards him is I saw him listed on Griffo's record a number of years back, probably about 3 years ago or so, because I did a video. There's a video on the channel of young Pluto as far as a photo animation video, and I did mention that. And in the photo animation video, essentially, I just took the pictures that he had available. It's not very long, and added some little AI-based animation towards it, right? So that's what initially got me interested in him. So I've looked into him somewhat, and I had thought about at different points making a video on him, but then I was like, I don't know exactly how I want to go about it. But something sparked me to look back into it here recently, and I was like, you know what? Just speak on the fights with Griffo, since there's like an account of him speaking on Griffo in his own words. And as you can see, despite them not liking each other, as I mentioned, he held Griffo in high regards as far as his abilities there in the ring, which tells you that certainly Griffo was no slouch. And Griffo, yeah, very interesting character just overall. And I did not to some of the others that Pluto fought, but yeah, realistically, yeah, not a big career. So, including some of the unofficial, or including some of the no decisions and such, he's listed as having 47 bouts, for instance, box rec 47, which decent amount. You do have individuals here in this day, their career doesn't reach 47 fights, but of course, back during those periods, you have individuals who have triple times that. And of course, Griffo is one of those. He's like 200 plus fights in that territory there. And it just goes to show you. So one of the things this does highlight, I think, just this video is how, and this will continue to be the case even here in modern time, there could be an individual that, from a name value perspective, there won't be many who know of him or her. There won't be many who are aware of their accomplishments, what they've done. They may be glanced at when looking through a record, a boxing record, whatever it may be. But that being said, each individual, I guess, you run across in the sport, they have their own story, even if it's a losing story or it's a story of one fight. You know, each individual has their own story, and oftentimes they're very interesting, especially when you start to tie in some of the background stuff. Young Pluto is one of those. He had an interesting name from my perspective, and that made me want to look into him a bit more. Even though a guy like Griffo has 200 plus fights, and there are probably countless other names of fighters that are on his resume and record that I don't know, that I hadn't really looked into, which is kind of what we do, or something that we all probably experience when looking through some of these older fighters and their records. But what gravitated me towards Pluto may be the thing that gravitates you to someone else. And that's how, and why I appreciate the channel just from an overall perspective, because there are often people who come on here and they share boxers that even I don't know, and I'll have to look into, and I'll want to look into. And that's how this history keeps going, and how we keep spreading the wealth, and how we keep sharing things. And I think it's a beautiful thing there, and I know that I'll continue to do so. So I appreciate everyone who drops by, shows some love as we go through these processes, and we continue to expand and grow here with the technology that we do have. So this is the story of Young Pluto. Not a huge name in the sport, but certainly someone who had an impact. Even if he is in Australia, or even if it was primarily in Australia, he did ultimately have an impact. Now, he's recorded as having 4 fights in the U.S., and one of those was against Tim Callahan, as I mentioned, and one of those was against George Dixon. As a matter of fact, his first fight in the U.S. was against George Dixon, and it was for the World Featherweight title. Now, will be noted that this says that Pluto did come in over, so he likely would have won it if he would have beaten George Dixon. But of course, we know George Dixon, one of the best ever as well. And Callahan, that was in 1899 in January, fought Callahan in April of 1899. And it looks like he spent about 4 to 5 months here, because by October, he was in the UK where he fought 2 fights as well. Very interesting individual there, Young Pluto. So, as mentioned, born Joseph William Dudley Brown, and you'll see reference of him as Joe Pluto. So Joe Pluto, I don't know exactly where the Pluto name came specifically, but it is something that is used. Now, another piece of information, and I meant to have it in a video, but I guess when I was writing it, where I put it at when I was recording it, maybe I overlooked it. But he did have a son that fought as well. Excuse me, as well under the name Pluto, Cyril Pluto. Let me see here, or Cyril Pluto. Yeah. So, and he was a welterweight who actually fought, which is amazing. So, Young Pluto, he had 3 sons. I didn't really get to into the overall back story, but he did have 3 sons, and he had a son that fought, Cyril Young Pluto. As a matter of fact, real quick, I'll share that just because I think it'll be good to share such right here before we get out of here. I just want to share this to show Hey, sometimes you find these connections as well that are kind of unexpected. And so I ended up, and the funny thing is, I had run across Cyril Pluto before, and I actually, didn't even put two and two together, actually. So Cyril Pluto, you see, he had a larger career than his father in terms of just overall fights. At least Boxer recorded 115 fights there. 69, 30, 15. So 14 KOs. So not a big puncher, but he could get it done in terms of, I guess, boxing and getting those wins. So you look through his resume. So a lot of his fights were in Australia. He fought in the UK. Oh, you got Frank Earn. Frank Earn. You know, oh, it's not the Frank Earn that I thought it was, actually. Not the Frank Earn that used to be the world lightweight champion. But it was a Frank Earn, no doubt about it. So, yeah, so this is the son of Young Pluto, Jackie Fitzgerald. Solid fighter. Run across him before. Tommy Jones. Run across him. Bill Lang. I'm thinking this is not the Bill Lang that was the heavyweight, but it could very well be Bill Lang. Bob Fitzsimmons. Probably not the Bob Fitzsimmons, considering this went down in 1934. And no, that's not that Bill Lang, because that was like 30-something as well. So, yeah, nah. But, yeah, so he had a son that got in a lot of work, a lot of fights. Jack O'Brien, not the Philadelphia type. So a lot of stuff that went down in Australia primarily there. That's what I guess we'll say. So interesting. So that's kind of some of the back information on Young Pluto, right? So very interesting dude. Very interesting. Quite a story. Pluto, tough as nails, pretty great fighter, says my man Dan the man. Yes, indeed there. So yeah, hey, props to Young Pluto. He did something there in the sport, as you say. And there are plenty of others out there who are names that, hey, I hope to continue to highlight. We all continue to highlight there. But Young Pluto, multi-time fighter and rival of Young Griffo, the World Featherweight Champion. And, of course, we did go into Young Griffo, but he had a number of names on his resume as well. George Nesmick, a.k.a. Jimmy Burns, Tommy White, you name it. So Griffo, hey, no doubt one of the best in history right there. And Pluto gave him some of his best work, according to Pluto, and seemingly the fact that they were matched multiple times. What that ultimately was, hey, the world may never know, but we know they were in there a ton. So that's the story of Young Pluto. Appreciate those that have checked out the video. Hey, continue to check it out. If you haven't checked it out, if you're seeing this, go check out that video there on Young Pluto, Young Griffo. Very, very interesting rivalry right here. And there have been some other fights that have been pretty crazy that rival one of this magnitude. That 76 rounder, though, that is certainly one. And I think more thorough accounts of it would probably even highlight it more. So I'll look into that a bit. But I think about Jeanette McVeigh, maybe the third fight or whatever it was in France. And it was a 49 rounder of similar magnitude in terms of just the back and forth amount of blood and all of that was involved with it. So there are countless stories out there. There are others that have gone these crazy amounts. Tommy Ryan, Danny Needham, I think it was a welterweight title fight that went a crazy amount of rounds. I want to say it might have been, I can't remember if it was 70 rounds or it might have been in that 70 round range, but a long fight, 4 hours, 5 hours, somewhere in there. So there are other stories out there. Check out, there's a video on the channel of Tommy Ryan, who fought Young Griffo. Check it out. Of course, there's one on everyone that was mentioned in that sort of lineup who Griffo compared to him. And Yeah, except for George Dixon. Haven't done one on George Dixon, though that one is one I will eventually do for sure. But Jack McAuliffe, Joe Gans, some different things out there. Tommy Ryan, checking him out. Very underrated fighter. Dan mentions there about 76. All right, appreciate you there, Dan. See, Dan knows this stuff on the game. So, yeah, so Tommy Ryan and Danny Needham in a fight that was around that right there. So there are many accounts of it. So that's why it's important to know that, yeah, it is pretty. There's a big difference between sort of the bare knuckle account for amount of rounds versus those competed under the Marcus of Queensberry. There is a big difference there, and that distinction needs to be drawn out because it's pretty crazy and insane to think about some of the fights that were actually happening. But hey, they did happen there. So it is what it is. But man, good stuff. Needham fought another fight over 100 rounds. Okay, good stuff there, Dan. I recall seeing something about that. You know, Needham, and he's not a very known fighter to the degree that he probably could or should be. So that's crazy stuff. Insane stories there. So these are the type of stories we're going to continue to highlight, folks. So make sure you stay tuned. If you can, do me a favor. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed. If you're checking this out, please subscribe. More will be coming. Hey, and I think there's a special one I'm gonna kick off here very, very soon. So, but it'll take a long period of time before I'm done with this one. So I'll try to have something out in the meantime and in between time. So thanks for everyone who dropped by here. Appreciate you all. Dan, Key, Josh, Rodolfo. Someone else dropped something in there, but anyway, I appreciate everyone who dropped by. I will be back. Probably going to do something on Sunday, boxing shit, but we'll be back for sure. And in the meantime, hey, keep studying up on that boxing history, baby. It's all appreciated there. So shout out to you, Dan, there. As always, you're appreciated there, buddy. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day and week. Peace out.